Good morning for AM 1340 and 99.5 FM WGRV. This is Reid Seals. I'm here with Greene County Mayor Kevin Morrison for our monthly interview. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Reid.
First thing, tell me about the CCU building and the updates that were voted on at the commission meeting on Monday.
Yes, the commission passed 16 to 5 the opening of the bids to renovate or finish renovating the CCU building to move in EMA and the election commission to the tune of about $200,000. Those included bringing the building up to ADA compliance, electrical changes with regard to running the EOC, giving the building a burglar and fire alarm, and then the finishes to the ceiling, some of the bathrooms, carpeting, and that sort of thing. I will say that most everybody involved, when the bids came back, was somewhat breathtaking in terms of the cost. We certainly didn't expect that amount, but there are some good shiny things that we can take away from it. Number one is that even with this additional cost, it's not going to trigger any fees or any need for increased taxes or anything such as that. So we have that money available in our capital projects to draw from to do this. So that's one of the good things. With the additional cost even added to the purchase price back in August, the building and the property is still 30% below the assessed value of the entire thing. And a local contractor did win the contract for completing the work. So we're actually helping out people here in our community to do the work for us and keep them employed. But it was rather breathtaking. A lot of the cost had to do with the generator that we really didn't know about. We knew that there had been some discussion about what to do about the EMA office. As you may recall, the EMA office was in the old Andrew Johnson School building and suffered from severe malodor in the building to the point that it had to be evacuated. It was petroleum or gasoline-based odor on the end of the building that the EMA was in. It didn't necessarily affect the credit union in Main Street, Greenville, that was actually there on the same floor down the hallway as much as it did EMA. And we evacuated them to the bottom floor of the current election office there on Main Street. And we actually had to ask Red Cross to move from that location, which they graciously did and allowed us to set up the EMA over there. We knew, for instance, that if we stayed in the old election building, that the known renovation cost from the bids that we received on the roof, the bathroom, and some small amounts of the electrical was $80,000 to $100,000, something like that. And in a building that age, when you start renovating and tearing out things, there's sometimes a cascade of things that get added to the cost. But over at the CCU building, we'll be dividing the electrical. That's part of this money that's being used for the renovation, so that the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, in the event of an emergency, can actually run on generator power and be performing 24/7 without the need for conventional electrical service. So that's a big portion of the cost. Again, we didn't anticipate it being that much, but still, it's going to turn out to be a good thing. As far as the election side of things, there will be plenty of parking. There will be relatively no waiting and no lines, hopefully for the presidential election coming up in November. And I think everybody's going to like it when we get done. So it's a good investment. I was actually approached a week or so ago in somewhat of a jovial fashion, joking fashion, that we could double our money by selling the CCU building back. Obviously, that was recognized as a great deal, the original purchase price, for somebody to say that. Obviously, the county government is not necessarily in the investment business or land flipping business, real estate flipping business, if you will. So we couldn't obviously accept that offer. I don't even know if that would have been lawful or not, but it was more or less in a jesting type fashion, but there were significant parties after we purchased the CCU building very much interested in the building itself.
And now for a hot button issue. What is the county doing about COVID-19?
We are implementing and following the presidential as well as the governor's declarations of public health emergencies. We may have a statement to come out later at the end of the week or possibly at the beginning of next week. The first thing I want to say to every Greene County listening is, number one, not to panic, but to prepare. This is something that our citizenry, our county, our town, it's somewhat of an emergency that we haven't faced. It's an emergency, for instance, that you can't see. The novel COVID-19 virus, or the coronavirus as it's more popularly known, is characterized as novel, meaning that there is very little known or even acquired immunity to. So that's not something that our bodies, for instance, have seen if we happen to catch it. So our immune systems has trouble processing and getting rid of the disease. So we have seen, for instance, the illness grow across the world, beginning in China, spreading to Europe, and now to the United States, causing some fairly significant sickness. But we just need to be very resourceful, and Greene County is. We're very resilient. We're fiercely self-reliant for the most part. But to follow the guidelines that the White House has published, and obviously some of those are, if you feel sick, stay at home. Lots of times, I know I've been guilty myself. We try to sort of power through, or man up, if you will, and stay at work and be loyal and complete our mission. But this is a little bit differently, and it's going to require us to think and act differently. So if you feel sick, you need to stay at home. If you have children, and I do, if they are sick, then keep them at home. Don't send them to school. Of course, the schools are closed now for the next few weeks. But if someone in your household is sick, they need to stay home and stay isolated. If the person is elderly, an older person, needs to stay at home and away from other people. And if you're a person with a serious underlying or comorbid illness, those people need to isolate themselves, stay at home, and stay away from others. I would encourage people to conduct only absolutely essential business, to limit their travel, basically here locally, and do the things that and make the decisions prudently. Use good judgment and good common sense, but not to panic and start hoarding things. I know that there's somewhat of a running entertainment about the scarcity of toilet paper. I don't necessarily understand that part of it, but I do understand, having enough groceries or supplies for your family for a couple of weeks, particularly items that are shelf stable and would last a while. If you have to be at home, isolated and in quarantine, for instance, if you're experiencing symptoms, then you can be tested or screened, at least have those symptoms screened by our health professionals. And if you meet the criteria in that screening for a test, then they will test you to determine whether you're positive or negative. But the biggest thing that we can do, obviously, if we're sick, stay home and isolate ourselves and comply with the social distancing that's been asked of us. That may adversely affect certain businesses. And if we have to implement other procedures to curb the rising rate of the infection, then I'm sure we'll consider those at the appropriate time. So,
now the census has started for 2020, and I've already filled it out. It was pretty easy. Can you tell us how to get involved?
Well, there's many ways to get involved. Obviously, the 1-855 Jobs 2020. If you're looking for a job in the census, you can you can call that number, 1-855-JOB-2020, and become a census worker. The rate is $15 an hour now and 50 cents a mile for those that travel. Census forms have been mailed out. In fact, despite when Benny the Bee came over to my office, I sat down and filled out my census form and sent it back in to be in compliance. It takes just a few minutes to record and count everybody in your household and send in that form. It is confidential. By law, that information has to be kept confidential. But it is used for a myriad of things, education dollars, road dollars, apportioning out different grant funds, both from the state as well as the federal government. Those demographic numbers are used for economic development and those types of things. But if you want to get involved, the best way to get involved in the census is obviously to fill out your census form first. If you're looking for a job, you can come to the Census Bureau and to the 1-855 number that I gave you, and volunteer to work later as what used to be classified as an enumerator, but it would be collecting the data from the organizations or individuals that are difficult to count. Those people like in dormitories and nursing homes and hospitals and jails and the like, that don't necessarily get an individual form. So that's how you can get involved, Reid.
And what are your thoughts on the high school study for 2 high schools?
Well, at the commission meeting Monday night, the commissioners voted on hiring architects following and approving the recommendation of the school board to study or at least come back with some type of preliminary plan and number for what the 2 high school plan that the school board has approved and may or may not be requesting at some point in time, what that might look like or cost. So once again, there's been a great debate going on now for a couple of years about how we're going to deal with dropping enrollment across not just Greene County, but across basically the entire eastern side of the state. This region is somewhat suffering from drops in enrollment. Obviously, that means reimbursement dollar issues, operational issues in terms of cost, ongoing cost, maintaining the same amount of stuff, buses, buildings, and the like that we've had for years with fewer and fewer dollars. So my view on it is we will see what the architects return with, and if I'm sure it'll be given careful consideration and patient, thoughtful consideration, and if that's something that the commission feels like that it's the direction that we need to go in, then I'm sure obviously the 21 of them will be allowed to weigh in, and so that is something to stay tuned for.
Well, I want to thank Greene County Mayor Kevin Morrison for joining us and talking with us about the County Commission meeting on Monday. This is Reid Seals for AM 1340 and 99.5 FM WGRV.